going to go ahead and take a look at the weather's role in the Eaton fire, which also includes the Palisades fire because they were both going on at the same time. But I'm going to focus on the Eaton fire and the three things that were significant factors, weather factors, in making this such a extreme event. First one is were the drought conditions going on at this time. From Los Angeles to San Diego, they were under a severe drought. They had dry conditions for the past 8 months. In fact, it was historic. The dry conditions starting in May with only 0.13 of an inch. Normally for the month, 0.32 of an inch. The next months, these are the dry months, June, July, August, September, where they get very little rain, and they received no rain during that time, at least no measurable rainfall. And then you get into the months where we started to see the chance for rain coming in, but nothing in October, only 0.14 of an inch in November and December, which is usually a pretty big month, and receiving almost 2.5 inches of rain. They received only 0.02 of an inch of rain and had no rain all the way till January 7th when the fire started. So that's the first condition. We only had 0.29 of an inch of rain from May through January 7th. Typically, they have almost 4.5 inches. That's the normal for that same time frame. So very, very dry conditions. The second condition that we had that was weather related was the direction of the wind. A weather pattern set up with high pressure out here off the coast of California and an area of low pressure over Southern California. What this does is it sets up an offshore wind. Now in Southern California, they call that a Santa Ana wind. And it's a very dry wind where you have this dry air that sets up over the southern deserts of the Southwest and Southern California. That air gets pushed up over the mountains and into the LA basin. This was the pattern that we saw at the beginning of January. That set things up for the high fire danger. Red flag warnings were issued, and these conditions lasted while the fire started and all during while the firefight was going on, all the way through mid-January. We continued with an offshore breeze. Even though it did weaken some, there were still some gusty winds over the mountains, through the canyons, and into the valley there in Southern California. So conditions stayed that way through, again, about the 11th, 12th, 13th, we still had that offshore breeze. The third factor that we're dealing with this was the mountains roll, the northeast winds going over the San Gabriel Mountains. Those winds getting pushed from the Mojave Desert, elevation about 2,500 feet, with temperature of the air at about 60 degrees on that date, got pushed up over the tops of the mountains, which sits at about 7,000 feet. As the air rises, it cools. That's just a natural phenomenon that goes on. As the air rises, the air cools. But the opposite occurs as it goes down the west slope of the San Gabriel Mountains. That's called a katabatic wind. And what it is you have these very dry conditions, dense air mass that's been sitting over the deserts, then actually picks up steam like a roller coaster rolling downhill. Gravity helps to increase the speed of those winds. And as it made its way into the San Gabriel Valley, temperatures were in the mid-70s, so actually a warmer, less dense air mass. So that also helps with that momentum of the winds. Another feature here is the canyons. Look at all these canyons that are in the San Gabriel Mountains. As the air descends into those canyons, there's a funneling effect that takes place. That air gets squeezed through the canyons, increasing the speed. In fact, we had wind speeds over the mountains, through the canyons, and into the valley that ranged anywhere from 60 to 100 mile-an-hour wind gusts, that making for a blast furnace effect with the fires once they started in the Altadena area. If you think that a situation like this is just centralized in Southern California, you're mistaken, because even in Northern California, we've had some wildfire events like the Camp Fire in Paradise and the Tubbs Fire in Santa Rosa that had similar effects like what we experienced here.